I thought my coworker was just socially awkward until I realized he was timing my breathing through the cubicle wall. I used to think the most dangerous thing in an office was burnout, deadlines, emails, quiet resentment. I was wrong. The most dangerous thing is the person who learns your routine better than you know it yourself. I started working at North River Solutions in late 2018. It was a mid-sized data management firm based outside Columbus, Ohio. One of those companies that proudly called itself a family, but felt more like a well-organized machine. The building was modern, gray, and aggressively neutral. Glass walls, gray carpet, gray cubicles, gray personalities. I was 27 at the time, recently divorced, desperate for stability. That's probably why I ignored the early signs. My desk was in the middle row of an open floor plan. No windows, just cubicle walls, tall enough to block vision, but thin enough to let sound leak through. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the white noise of corporate life. 3 cubicles to my left sat Evan. Evan was forgettable. Late 20s, pale, always wore the same navy blue sweaters, even in summer. He worked in compliance auditing, which meant long hours of staring at spreadsheets no one else wanted to touch. He didn't talk much. When he did, it was always a little too quiet, a little too delayed, like he was calculating the correct response rather than feeling it. Everyone labeled him socially awkward. I did too, at first. The first thing I noticed wasn't visual. It was sound. Every day around 10:15 a.m., I'd feel him shift in his chair. Not loudly, just enough that I could hear the faint squeak through the cubicle wall. Then nothing. No typing, no mouse clicks, just stillness. Then, right when I leaned back to stretch, his chair would squeak again. Perfectly timed. Coincidence, I told myself. By week 3, patterns emerged. If I went to the break room for coffee, Evan went 5 minutes later. If I took a bathroom break, I'd hear his chair move shortly after. If I stayed late, he stayed later. Once during a stressful deadline week, I pulled an accidental all-nighter. At 11:47 p.m., exhausted and bleary-eyed, I stood up and grabbed my jacket. I heard Evan stand up too. I froze. I waited. So did he. I sat back down. A few seconds later, I heard his chair lower again. That was the first time my stomach tightened. I started testing it. I'd fake cough. 5 seconds later, Evan coughed. I'd take a deep breath and slowly exhale. Silence. Then, a matching exhale from the other side of the cubicle wall. Too close, too deliberate. I stopped breathing loudly. So did he. "Dude's just mirroring," my coworker Jenna said when I mentioned it casually. "Some people do that subconsciously." I laughed it off, but something about the precision unsettled me. Not emotional mirroring, mechanical, measured. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. I was working on a sensitive client report, headphones in, volume low. I had a bad headache, so I closed my eyes for a moment, resting my forehead against the cubicle wall. I wasn't asleep, just still. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Not words. Numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4. My blood turned cold. I pulled my headphones off slowly. The counting stopped instantly. I held my breath. 10 seconds passed, then I heard Evan inhale, long, controlled, and begin counting again. 5, 6. He was counting my breaths. I stood up so fast my chair slammed into the desk. Evan's cubicle went silent. I walked around the corner. He was sitting perfectly still, hands folded, staring at his monitor, a spreadsheet open, unblinking. "Hey," I said, forcing a laugh. "Did you say something just now?" He turned to me slowly. "No." Too fast, too flat. "Sure?" "Yes." His eyes didn't move. They stayed locked on my face, studying me. I muttered something about stress and walked away. My hands were shaking. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard counting, measured breathing, timing. The next week, things escalated. I found a sticky note on my desk. No name, just numbers written in pen. 4, 7, 8. The breathing technique. I never used it at work, never said it out loud. I crumpled the note and threw it away. By lunch, another note appeared. You exhale longer when you're anxious. I went straight to HR. They smiled, nodded, took notes. Evan's a little different, they said gently, but he's harmless. Harmless. That word would haunt me. I started arriving early and leaving early. Evan adjusted. I changed my lunch schedule. Evan followed. I worked from a conference room one day. At 3:14 p.m., Evan sat outside the glass wall, not working, watching, breathing in sync. The night everything shattered, I stayed late by accident. A system error corrupted my files. By the time I fixed it, the office was empty, except for Evan. The lights in most rows were off. Emergency lighting cast long shadows. I stood up, heart pounding. Evan didn't move. "Long day," I said, forcing cheer. "Yes," he replied. Silence. I grabbed my bag. As I walked past his cubicle, he spoke again. "You breathe differently when you're scared." I stopped. "How would you know that?" He turned his chair slowly. "I listen." I ran, didn't grab my coat, didn't say goodbye, I didn't look back. The next morning, police were waiting at the office. Evan had been arrested overnight. They found journals in his apartment, hundreds of pages, diagrams of cubicles, schedules, breathing patterns, mine. He had written about perfect moments, about rehearsal, about waiting until synchronization was complete. The detective told me one final thing before leaving. He wasn't watching you to hurt you immediately. He was practicing control. I quit that day. Even now, years later, I still catch myself listening to my own breathing in public places, making sure no one else is counting. Because monsters don't always breathe loudly. Sometimes they wait until you breathe first.